Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into a story from history that's, well, it's pretty extraordinary and honestly, kind of disturbing in parts.
hmm
We're looking at the Habsburg dynasty.
A huge name in European history, right?
Yeah,
Their reach was incredible. Austria, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, just massive influence for centuries.
exactly. And if you're listening because you like getting up to speed on big historical topics quickly, this one's a fascinating, if maybe slightly uncomfortable, ride.
Definitely. It's a real case study in how power was held, but the methods they used were, let's say, unique.
Unique is one word for it. I mean, think about Austria. They were in charge for 636 years.
Wow. 1282 to 1918. That's quite a run.
It really is. And Spain, too, for a long stretch.
Yeah.
But their main trick for staying on top, it wasn't always about winning wars or, clever diplomacy.
No, it was much closer to home, literally.
Yeah, we're talking about inbreeding. Lots and lots of it.
Yeah.
Systematically.
It's kind of this glorious, disturbing historical train wreck you can't look away from. Think elaborate costumes, powdered wigs, and a genetic horror story playing out underneath.
And right at the center of that, or at least a major example, is Charles II of Spain. Poor guy was known as the Bewitched.
Right, which sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but the reality was much more biological. Less sorcery, more centuries of very, very close family marriages catching up with them.
A genetic horror story with powdered wigs. You said it. Okay, let's dive into that. This Habsburg obsession with marrying relatives. Why? What was the thinking there?
Well, the core idea, strange as it seems to us now, was all about keeping control. They wanted wealth, titles, influence, all that good stuff, to stay strictly within the Habsburg family.
So, unlike other royal families who often married out to create alliances.
Exactly. Marrying outsiders, even other royals, was often seen as diluting the Habsburg brand, so to speak,
Mhm.
weakening their claim, maybe losing territory or influence down the line. It was about preserving the perceived purity of their line.
Purity through, keeping it all in the family. Okay.
We see similar ideas pop up elsewhere in history, where maintaining a strict social hierarchy or lineage was the absolute top priority.
Right. So instead of building bridges, they built fences around the family tree. Can you give us some examples? How
Uh-huh.
close are we talking?
Oh, very close. We're talking repeated marriages between first cousins, second
Mhm.
cousins, yeah, but also uncles and nieces.
Uncle niece. That's it. Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just a freak occurrence either. Looking at the records, it was a sustained pattern over generations. It seems like marrying your cousin or your niece was just, standard dinner table matchmaking for them.
Which is just wild, considering most royals used marriage precisely to avoid this kind of thing and for alliances. Okay, let's focus on Charles II then, the Bewitched. You said the nickname was kind of a cover story.
Pretty much, yeah. It was easier for people at the time, maybe politically safer too, to blame witchcraft or curses for his many, many health problems, rather than point the finger at the royal family's marriage strategies.
Can't really blame the king's great-great-grandparents for marrying their cousins, can you? Easier to blame a witch.
It avoids some awkward conversations, definitely. But the reality was he inherited the culmination of centuries of this inbreeding.
And it hit him hard. Tell us about his Habsburg starter pack, as our notes call it. What
Oh,
were the
God.
specifics?
Oh, it's grim. First, the famous Habsburg jaw, a massively protruding lower jaw. So much so that it apparently made chewing very difficult.
Okay. What else?
Well, developmental delays were significant. He didn't speak until he was about 4 years old.
4.
Yeah. And didn't walk until he was 8.
8. Wow.
Then there was chronic illness throughout his life, epilepsy, infertility, just generally frail,
Hmm.
and apparently chronic diarrhea was also part of the package, just a cascade of issues,
That sounds absolutely miserable. It really puts those, stiff royal portraits in a different light.
doesn't it? These genetic issues happen when harmful recessive genes, which normally hide, get paired up because the parents share so much DNA from common ancestors. The chances just skyrocket with close relatives.
And that description someone wrote looked like his skull had lost a fist fight with evolution. It's brutal, but it paints a picture.
It's stark, yeah. And that jaw, the Habsburg jaw, it wasn't just him, was it?
Right. No, not at all. It was practically a family logo by that point. You look at the portraits down the line, you see it again and again. That. Oh, what did the note say? Bulldog underbite energy.
Uh-huh, yes. It's quite distinct. His own parents, Philip I and Mariana of Austria, both had it pretty prominently. It was a visible sign of just how interconnected they all were.
A living genetic signature.
Yeah.
And his parents' relationship, that really drives home how tangled things got, doesn't it?
It really does. Philip I wasn't just Mariana's husband. He was also her uncle.
Uncle and niece. So wait, that means Charles's grandmother was also his aunt.
Yeah. His maternal grandmother was his paternal aunt. Like you said, the family tree isn't so much a tree as a tangled shrub, maybe.
Tangled shrub. That's a good way to put it. It's hard to even map that out in your head.
It really is. The lines just keep crossing back over themselves.
And this isn't just us looking at portraits and making guesses, right? People have actually studied the marriage records.
Oh, absolutely. Researchers went through the records, looking at 73 Habsburg royal marriages between the mid-1400s and the mid-1700s.
And what did they find? Statistically.
The numbers are pretty telling. They found 4 uncle-niece marriages, 11 first-cousin marriages,
Yeah.
7 second-cousin marriages,
Okay.
and apparently 1 third-cousin marriage, which one source joked was showing admirable restraint.
Restraint compared to uncles and nieces, I suppose.
Right. And that's just the officially documented ones. They also mention an uncountable number of miscellaneous cousin-adjacent hookups. So the actual level might have been even higher.
Wow. That mock slogan, too close is close enough, sounds darkly accurate.
It kind of sums it up, yeah.
Now, some people listening might think, okay, but didn't other royals intermarry? What about, say, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip? They were related.
That's a fair question, but it's really a matter of degree. A huge difference in degree.
How so?
Well, Elizabeth and Philip were third cousins once removed, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe fourth cousins another way. The estimated genetic overlap for their children is tiny, something like 0.8%.
Okay, 0.8%. How does that compare to the Habsburgs?
It's not even in the same ballpark. The Habsburg gene pool became incredibly restricted, really shallow. One source called it a shallow gene pool with evaporation warnings.
Evaporation warnings, I like that.
Yeah, because with each generation of close marriage, the diversity just shrinks and shrinks. The chances of those harmful recessive genes meeting up just goes way up.
Can we quantify that risk? Is there a number for someone like Charles?
Yes, they use something called the inbreeding coefficient. It measures the probability that someone inherits 2 copies of the same gene variant from an ancestor shared by both parents. For Charles II's sister, Margaret Teresa, you might know her from that famous Velázquez painting, Las Meninas.
Ah, yes.
Her inbreeding coefficient was calculated at around 0.3. Now, to give you context, the coefficient for a child born to full siblings like a brother and sister would typically be 1.25.
So hers was higher than a child of siblings.
Exactly. And Charles II's was likely very similar, maybe even a touch higher.
That is staggering. But wait, you mentioned Margaret Teresa seemed relatively okay.
That's the weird thing, isn't it? Genetics is complex. Despite that incredibly high coefficient, historical accounts describe her as fairly intelligent, sociable, charming, not suffering the same extreme physical disabilities as her brother Charles.
So even with that level of inbreeding, it wasn't a guaranteed outcome.
No, it seems not. It highlights the probabilistic nature of it all. The risk was massively increased, but the specific outcome could still vary. Charles just drew a particularly unlucky genetic hand.
A very unlucky hand. Now, despite all his health issues, Charles II did get married, right? Twice.
He did. His first wife was Marie-Louise of Orleans. Notably, she wasn't a close relative, which was unusual for him.
A bit of fresh genetic air, maybe. How did that go?
Sadly, not well for her. Reports suggest she was deeply unhappy at the Spanish court, possibly stressed by the situation and the pressure to produce an heir, which didn't happen. She died after about 10 years, maybe from stress-related gut issues. Some sources suggest comfort eating played a role too.
Oh, dear. And the second wife?
His second wife was Maria Anna of Neuburg, and this choice was very strategic. Her family was known for being very fertile.
They were trying to counteract his issues.
Exactly. They were clearly hoping her genetics could overcome his lack of fertility. But it didn't work. Charles remained infertile.
And we know why he was infertile, don't we? From the autopsy.
We do. It's quite graphic, actually. The autopsy performed after his death, which was unusual in itself for a Spanish king.
Why did they do one on him?
Apparently, he was considered just too medically fascinating to pass up the chance. The state of his body was so clearly abnormal.
Okay, so what did they find, besides the infertility source?
The report mentioned he had only 1 testicle, and it was tiny and necrotic, basically dead tissue.
Wow. Actually recorded in the official autopsy.
Yes. But that wasn't all. The other findings were just as grim. They reported things like no blood in his body.
No blood? How is that even possible?
It's hard to imagine. Sounds like extreme anemia or perhaps a postmortem artifact, but that's what was written. Also, a heart the size of a peppercorn, rotted intestines, and fluid water, basically, in his skull.
Good heavens, it sounds less like a person and more like a collection of severe medical failure.
It really does paint a picture of a body completely ravaged by genetic misfortune.
So inevitably, with these issues and infertility, he died without an heir. What happened next for Spain?
Predictably, chaos. His death without a direct Habsburg successor kicked off the War of the Spanish Succession, a huge European conflict.
Who ended up on the throne?
It eventually went to Philip of Anjou, who was a grandson of Louis XIV of France, a Bourbon.
So that was it, the end of the Spanish Habsburg line.
That was it for Spain. Their strategy of keeping the family tree like a closed loop, a hamster wheel, as one source put it, ultimately led to its complete collapse in that branch.
A real self-inflicted dynastic wound. Now, you mentioned the Austrian Habsburgs lasted longer.
They did, yeah. They continued ruling until the end of World War I. They also had their share of intermarriage, though maybe not quite as intensely concentrated as the Spanish line in its final generations.
Any notable examples jump out?
Well, remember Charles II's sister,
Mm-hmm.
Margaret Theresa, the one with the super high inbreeding coefficient.
Yeah.
She married Emperor Leopold I, who happened to be her uncle, and also Charles II's uncle.
Wait, Leopold was uncle to both Charles and Margaret, and then married Margaret.
Bingo. He married his niece, who was already highly inbred. It's,
Ugh.
yeah, definitely material for another deep dive, the Austrian side.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, so wrapping up this rather grim but fascinating deep dive into the Habsburg way,
Mm.
what are the main takeaways for us?
Well, first, I think it's a stark lesson in how the drive for power, for control, can lead people and families to do things that seem objectively uh, pretty insane, even self-destructive.
Like ignoring basic biology for the sake of keeping titles in the family.
Exactly. Second, it's just a powerful, if tragic, illustration of why genetic diversity matters. It's not just some abstract scientific concept. It's crucial for health, for viability, even for royal dynasties.
And maybe a slightly lighter takeaway. It's generally advisable to look beyond your first cousins when dating.
Uh-huh, yes. Probably a sound piece of advice, historically supported.
Absolutely.
And finally, there's a dark irony, isn't there? Through all their, frankly, terrible decisions and biologically questionable choices, the Habsburgs inadvertently gave future generations, especially geneticists, a huge amount of data.
They became unintentional pioneers of human genetics research through their own suffering.
In a way, yes. Their very specific, very extreme family history became a case study on the effects of inbreeding.
Right. So maybe a slightly sarcastic thank you to the Habsburgs for their contribution to the textbooks, written in unfortunate genetic code.
A contribution born from terrible decisions and worse DNA choices, as our notes so bluntly put it.
Indeed. And to everyone listening, thanks for sticking with us through this. If you made it this far without feeling too queasy, you're probably stronger than most Habsburg immune systems.
Haha, well said. And maybe one final thought to leave people with.
Yeah.
Think about the long game. The Habsburgs made choices for immediate power consolidation, but the consequences built up slowly, almost unseen, generation after generation, until the collapse. Makes you wonder about other decisions made for power or control, maybe in society today. What are the long-term, unseen consequences accumulating beneath the surface, not just genetically, but maybe socially, economically, politically?
That's a really interesting point. The slow burn of consequences from decisions focused only on short-term control. Something to definitely chew on.
Beyond the jaws and the wigs, there's a deeper cautionary tale there, I think.